What you're about to see happened on a dangerous road, where a bull blocked a bus's path, creating an unexpected scene. The driver, already irritated by the situation, hurried off the vehicle. But what he found on the other side of the road was nothing like what he expected. Something happened there that would change his life forever. You'll be shocked by what happened next. Subscribe to the channel and find out how this story took a turn that no one could have predicted. The oppressive heat of the Montana summer pressed down on Ethan Miller as he maneuvered the tour bus along Route 87. The narrow, winding road carved through dense forest, miles away from what most would consider civilization. Ethan had been driving this route for 8 years now, shuttling tourists between Great Falls and the more remote hiking destinations in the mountains. Today, the air conditioning was struggling against the unusually hot August afternoon, and Ethan's patience was wearing as thin as the asphalt beneath his wheels. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're about an hour from our next stop," he announced through the microphone, his voice betraying more fatigue than he intended. The 12 passengers, a mix of outdoor enthusiasts and photographers from various states, barely acknowledged him, too engrossed in their conversations or the spectacular views outside their windows. Ethan sighed, placing the microphone back in its holder. At 43, he had spent most of his adult life behind the wheel of one vehicle or another. The son of a truck driver, he had initially resisted following in his father's footsteps, even earning a business degree he never used. But something about the open road had eventually pulled him back, as if the highway itself had been calling his name. Lately, though, that call had begun to sound more like a monotonous drone. Each curve in the road looked exactly like the last, each group of tourists indistinguishable from the ones before. Even the surrounding wilderness, which had once filled him with wonder, had become mere backdrop scenery to his mundane existence. Wiping sweat from his brow, Ethan rounded another bend, his mind drifting to thoughts of his empty apartment in Great Falls. The divorce 3 years ago had left him with little more than his job and a collection of fishing gear he rarely used anymore. Perhaps that's why the road had become his true home. It asked nothing of him beyond his attention to the next mile. The bus jolted suddenly as Ethan slammed on the brakes, the vehicle skidding slightly before coming to a halt. There, standing, squarely in the middle of the narrow road, was one of the largest bulls Ethan had ever seen. "What the hell?" he muttered, staring through the windshield at the massive animal. It wasn't unusual to encounter wildlife in this part of Montana, but this wasn't some wild bison or elk. This was clearly a domesticated bull, though it bore no tags or markings indicating ownership. Its hide was a deep, rich brown, almost black in the shadows cast by the towering pines that lined the roadway. From the back of the bus came murmurs of curiosity, as passengers pressed their faces against windows to glimpse what had caused their abrupt stop. "Folks, looks like we've got a bit of a roadblock," Ethan announced, forcing levity into his voice. "Nothing to worry about, just one of the locals taking his time crossing the road." But even as he spoke, Ethan felt something unusual about this encounter. The bull wasn't moving. It stood perfectly still, its broad chest facing the bus, its head held high in what almost seemed like defiance. And its eyes, Ethan couldn't quite explain it, but those eyes seemed to be looking directly at him, not with the vacant stare of livestock, but with something that resembled intelligence, perhaps even purpose. Muttering under his breath, Ethan opened the bus door. "I'll just go encourage our friend to move along," he said to no one in particular. "Please remain seated." The heat hit him like a physical force as he stepped outside. The asphalt radiated warmth through the soles of his boots, and the still air clung to his skin. Ethan moved cautiously toward the bull, keeping a respectable distance as he waved his arms. "Come on, big fella. You can't stay here. We've got places to be." The bull didn't flinch. Instead, it lowered its massive head slightly, its eyes, a startling amber color Ethan had never seen in cattle before, remaining fixed on him. There was something in that gaze that made Ethan freeze in his tracks. It wasn't fear that stopped him, though any sane person would exercise caution around an animal that size, but a sudden, inexplicable feeling that this meeting was somehow meant to happen. "What are you doing out here all alone?" Ethan asked softly, surprised by his own words. He had never been one to talk to animals, not even pets, yet here he was, addressing this bull as if it might understand him. And strangely, it seemed to respond. The bull shifted its weight, turning slightly to the side while maintaining eye contact with Ethan. Then it took a few deliberate steps toward the edge of the road, where a barely visible trail disappeared into the dense forest. Ethan frowned, glancing back at the bus. The passengers were watching with a mixture of concern and curiosity. He should get back on the bus. He should continue the tour as scheduled. That's what responsible drivers did. Yet something, a feeling he couldn't name, tugged at him, drawing his attention back to the bull. The animal had stopped at the trailhead, looking back at Ethan expectantly. It was absolutely absurd to think that the bull wanted him to follow, but that was exactly the impression Ethan got. "This is crazy," he muttered to himself, "completely insane." Nevertheless, he found himself walking back to the bus door. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, leaning inside, "I need to check something out. It appears this bull might have escaped from a nearby ranch. I'm going to see if I can find where it came from. Please remain on the bus. I'll only be a few minutes." Before anyone could object, Ethan grabbed a small flashlight from beneath his seat and a bottle of water. Acting on impulse, he also took his weathered backpack that contained a first aid kit, a map of the area, and a few granola bars he kept for emergencies. As he stepped away from the bus, Ethan wondered what he was doing. Following strange bulls into the Montana wilderness wasn't part of any tour guide protocol he knew. Yet his feet carried him forward, toward the waiting animal and the hidden trail beyond. The bull watched him approach, its tail swishing once as if in approval. Then, with surprising grace for a creature of its size, it turned and began walking down the narrow path, its massive form somehow navigating the tight space between trees without disturbing so much as a branch. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped onto the trail. The temperature dropped immediately as he moved beneath the dense canopy of pine and spruce. The forest floor, cushioned with decades of fallen needles, muffled his footsteps. Ahead, the bull moved with surprising speed and certainty, always staying just visible enough for Ethan to follow. "I must be losing my mind," Ethan whispered to himself, yet he pressed on, following the bull deeper into the wilderness, away from the road, away from his usual route, away from everything familiar. Something inside told him that whatever waited at the end of this impromptu journey would change everything he thought he knew about his world, and perhaps about himself. The forest grew denser as Ethan followed the mysterious bull deeper into the wilderness. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in scattered beams, creating an almost ethereal quality to the air around him. Time seemed to lose meaning as he walked. The sounds of the highway long faded behind him. Only the occasional snap of a twig beneath the bull's hooves assured Ethan that he wasn't hallucinating this entire experience. "I should turn back," he said aloud, yet made no move to do so. His passengers would be getting worried. His schedule would be thrown off. His boss would have questions he couldn't possibly answer. Yet none of these concerns seemed to matter as much as the pull he felt to continue following this strange animal. After what could have been 20 minutes or an hour, Ethan had lost track. The path widened slightly, and ahead, nestled in a small clearing surrounded by ancient pines, stood a cabin. Ethan stopped, momentarily stunned by the sight. The structure was old, but not decrepit, built of darkened logs with a sharply pitched roof currently catching the late afternoon sunlight. A small porch wrapped around the front, its floorboards weathered but solid. There were no vehicles, no power lines, no signs of recent human presence. The bull continued forward without hesitation, climbing the 3 steps to the porch with surprising agility. At the door, it turned to look at Ethan, those amber eyes seeming to beckon him forward. "This is trespassing," Ethan murmured, even as he approached the cabin. "Someone owns this place." Yet something told him this wasn't an ordinary vacation cabin. It felt older, more significant somehow. The windows were intact but covered with a fine layer of dust that suggested long absence, and the door, toward which the bull now nudged with its massive head, bore intricate carvings of what appeared to be intertwined branches and animal forms. Feeling as though he was moving in a dream, Ethan stepped onto the porch. The bull shifted aside, allowing him access to the door. Up close, the carvings were even more detailed than he'd initially observed. Wolves running alongside deer, eagles, soaring above bears, all connected by a flowing pattern of leaves and branches. Ethan reached for the iron handle, half expecting it to be locked. Instead, it turned smoothly under his hand, the door swinging inward with barely a whisper of sound. The interior was dim but not dark, illuminated by the sunlight that filtered through windows on each wall. Dust motes danced in these beams, but otherwise the cabin was surprisingly clean. No cobwebs in corners, no leaves blown in from outside. The main room was dominated by a stone fireplace against one wall, and to Ethan's astonishment, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves on the others. "What is this place?" he whispered, stepping. Inside, the bull followed, its large form somehow not seeming out of place despite the confined space. It moved past Ethan and stood near the center of the room, where a single wooden table held a large, leather-bound book. Ethan approached the bookshelves first, drawn by their unexpected presence in this remote location. The volumes they contained were old, their spines faded but still legible. Many were in languages he didn't recognize. Some looked like Latin, others had characters he'd never seen before. Those in English bore titles relating to natural history, animal behavior, and what appeared to be mythology. "The Sacred Bond Between Land and Guardian," Ethan read from one spine, carefully pulling the book from its place. The cover featured an illustration similar to the door carvings, animals and humans intertwined in a circular pattern. He opened it carefully, finding pages of handwritten text accompanied by detailed illustrations. "Since time immemorial," he read aloud, "the Guardians have chosen their human counterparts to maintain the balance between the worlds. The connection, once established, cannot be broken except by the most profound betrayal." A soft sound, something between a snort and a low moan, drew Ethan's attention back to the bull, which now stood directly beside the table. Its eyes moved deliberately from Ethan to the book that lay open there. Replacing the volume he held, Ethan moved toward the table. The book waiting there was massive, bound in what appeared to be dark leather, with metal accents at the corners and spine. Unlike the other books, this one bore no title on its cover, only an embossed symbol that resembled a tree with roots extending as far below ground as its branches reached toward the sky. Ethan hesitated before touching it, a strange electricity seeming to hover in the air around the volume. When he finally placed his hand on the cover, a warmth spread through his palm and up his arm, not uncomfortable, but definitely unusual. He opened the book. The first page contained only a short phrase in flowing script. "To those who are chosen, knowledge brings both power and obligation." The pages that followed contained text in multiple languages, but strangely, Ethan found he could understand the meaning even when the words themselves were foreign to him. The book spoke of an ancient system of guardianship, where certain animals, referred to as sentinels, would select human counterparts to help maintain natural balances and protect ancient knowledge that connected all living things. According to the text, these animals were not simply beasts, but carriers of a profound wisdom passed down through countless generations. They possessed an awareness beyond ordinary creatures, and could recognize humans with the potential to share in their mission. As Ethan turned the pages, one passage in particular caught his eye. The Bull Sentinel guards the knowledge of connection between all beings. It chooses individuals who have lost their path but possess the strength to bear great responsibility. When the bull appears, it signifies a time of transformation and awakening to one's true purpose. Ethan looked up sharply at the bull, which stood watching him with those intelligent amber eyes. You brought me here on purpose," he said, the realization washing over him like a wave. "You chose me." The bull lowered its head once, in what could only be interpreted as a nod. Ethan's hands trembled slightly as he continued reading. The book described how, once chosen, a human would gradually develop a heightened sensitivity to the natural world and the ability to perceive the thoughts and intentions of animals, not in words, but in impressions, emotions, and images. This connection would grow stronger over time, eventually allowing the person to sense disturbances in the natural order and help restore balance when needed. According to the text, this bond was not to be taken lightly. Those chosen were entrusted with ancient secrets that, if misused, could cause great harm. They became protectors, not just of knowledge, but of the delicate equilibrium that sustained all life. "This can't be real," Ethan murmured. Yet even as he spoke, he knew it was. Something deep within him recognized the truth in these pages, as if he had always known it but had somehow forgotten until this moment. He turned to the bull. "Why me? I'm just a bus driver. I'm nobody special." The bull's gaze remained steady, and suddenly Ethan felt an impression form in his mind. Not words exactly, but a clear sense that his ordinary life had been preparation for something greater. His years on the road, observing the changing landscapes, the rhythms of nature through the seasons, had attuned him to the world in ways he hadn't recognized. As the realization settled over him, Ethan noticed the sunlight fading through the windows. He had been in the cabin far longer than he intended. His passengers would be more than worried by now. They'd likely called for help. "I have to go back," he said, closing the book reluctantly. "People will be looking for me." The bull stepped back, making room for Ethan to move toward the door. But as he reached the threshold, Ethan turned back, his hand resting on the carved wooden surface. "Will I find this place again?" he asked. In response, he felt another impression form, a certainty that the path would reveal itself when needed, but also a warning. Now that he had been chosen, he had entered a world larger and more complex than he had ever imagined. His life would never be the same. The questioning began the moment Ethan emerged from the forest. His bus stood where he had left it, now surrounded by two sheriff's department vehicles, their lights flashing silently in the late afternoon sun. His passengers had been moved to one of the patrol cars, and a search party was being organized. When Ethan walked calmly out of the trees, "Where the hell have you been, Miller?" Sheriff Jim Braddock demanded, his weathered face a mask of concern and irritation. "These folks have been waiting nearly 2 hours." Ethan blinked, surprised by how much time had passed. "I'm sorry, Jim. There was this bull. I thought it might have escaped from one of the ranches. I was trying to see where it came from." The explanation sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Sheriff Braddock, who had known Ethan since high school, narrowed his eyes. "A bull? Out here? Nearest cattle ranch is 20 miles south." He studied Ethan's face. "You feeling all right? You look different." Ethan nodded quickly. "Just got a bit turned around in the woods. I'm fine." He wasn't fine. He felt fundamentally altered, as if the world around him had shifted slightly on its axis. Even now, standing on the familiar asphalt of Route 87, everything seemed sharper, more vibrant. He could smell the distinct resins of different pine species, hear the subtle movements of small animals in the underbrush yards away, sense the approaching rainstorm that wouldn't arrive for hours yet. The rest of that day passed in a blur. Ethan apologized profusely to his passengers, invented a story about following what he thought was an injured animal, and somehow managed to complete the tour route despite his distracted state. When he finally returned to his apartment in Great Falls that evening, he collapsed onto his sofa, physically and mentally exhausted. "This can't be happening," he muttered to the empty room. "I imagined it all." But even as he spoke, his gaze fell on his hiking boots by the door, boots now bearing traces of soil and pine needles that hadn't been there before. And when he reached into his jacket pocket, his fingers closed around a small object he didn't remember placing there. A polished stone, amber-colored like the bull's eyes, warm to the touch despite the cool evening air. Sleep eluded Ethan that night. His dreams, when they came, were vivid and strange, filled with running animals, ancient forests, and the persistent image of the book in the cabin, its pages turning of their own accord. He woke before dawn, drenched in sweat, but feeling more alert than he had in years. The next few days brought subtle but unmistakable changes. On his morning route, Ethan found himself noticing wildlife he had previously overlooked. Not just deer and elk that were common sights, but smaller creatures. Foxes watching from beneath fallen logs, hawks circling precisely above certain meadows, even insects whose movements suddenly seemed purposeful rather than random. More striking were the moments when these animals seemed to notice him back. A coyote paused in crossing the road ahead of his bus, turning to stare directly at Ethan before disappearing into the brush. A bald eagle changed its flight path to soar alongside his vehicle for nearly a mile. Even the squirrels in the park, where he ate lunch between routes, would approach him fearlessly, sitting near his bench as if waiting for him to speak. "You're losing it, Miller," he told himself repeatedly, yet he couldn't deny the changes he was experiencing. By the end of the week, the sensations had intensified. While driving a group of seniors through Glacier National Park, Ethan suddenly pulled the bus to the side of the road and announced an unscheduled stop. "If you look about 50 yards up that ridge," he said, pointing toward a densely wooded hillside, "you'll see something pretty special." The passengers murmured in confusion, seeing nothing but trees. Then, as if on cue, a mother mountain lion emerged from the shadows, 3 cubs trailing behind her. The magnificent cats paused in a small clearing, clearly visible to the astonished tourists. The mother looked directly at the bus, at Ethan, before leading her young ones along the ridgeline and out of sight. "How did you know they were there?" one of the passengers asked afterward, clearly impressed. Ethan shrugged. "Just got lucky, I guess." But it wasn't luck. He had felt their presence, a warm, focused energy that drew his attention to that specific location. And somehow, he had known the mountain lion would show herself if he stopped. That evening, sitting alone on the small balcony of his apartment with a cup of coffee, Ethan tried to make sense of his new reality. The rational part of his mind continued to search for logical explanations. Perhaps he was experiencing some kind of breakdown. Maybe he had always been more observant than he realized, and the encounter with the bull had simply heightened his awareness. But in his heart, he knew the truth. The book in the cabin had described exactly what was happening to him. He was developing a connection to the natural world that transcended ordinary human perception. He was becoming what the book called a chosen bearer, someone selected by a sentinel to help maintain the balance between human activity and the natural order. As this realization settled over him, Ethan noticed a large crow land on his balcony railing. The bird regarded him with intelligent eyes, tilting its head as if assessing him. "Hello there," Ethan said softly. The crow made no sound but continued to watch him. And then, just as had happened with the bull, Ethan felt an impression form. In his mind, not words, but a clear sense of an invitation. The crow wanted him to follow. "Now," It's getting dark. The crow hopped impatiently on the railing. Sighing, Ethan stood up. "This is becoming a habit," he muttered, grabbing his jacket. But there was no real reluctance in his movement. Part of him, a growing part, was eager to explore these new experiences. The crow led him through the quiet streets of Great Falls, flying short distances ahead and waiting for him to catch up. Their path took them to Gibson Park, nearly empty as twilight deepened into night. The few remaining visitors paid no attention to the man apparently following a crow across the grounds. Near the park's pond, the crow landed on a bench where an elderly woman sat feeding ducks despite the late hour. She wore a simple dress and cardigan, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. As Ethan approached, she looked up with a smile that suggested she had been expecting him. "There you are," she said, her voice warm but carrying an authority that immediately commanded respect. "I was beginning to wonder if Merlin had lost his way." The crow, apparently named Merlin, gave an indignant caw and fluttered to land on the woman's shoulder. "You were expecting me?" Ethan asked, cautiously taking a seat beside her. "For some time now," she replied, tossing the last of her breadcrumbs to the waiting ducks. "The signs have been pointing to a new bearer in this region. When Taurus chose you, word spread quickly among those of us who listen." "Taurus. The bull who found you," she explained. "One of the oldest and most discerning sentinels." Ethan stared at her. "Who are you?" "My name is Eleanor Blackwood," she said. "Like you, I was chosen 47 years ago by Merlin's ancestor." She stroked the crow's gleaming feathers. "I've been waiting for someone like you to appear. There are too few of us left who understand the old ways, who can help maintain the balance." "The balance between humans and nature," Ethan said, recalling the book's words. Eleanor nodded approvingly. "You've started to read the Codex, good, but understanding comes not just from reading, but from experiencing. Your senses are awakening. That's only the beginning." "Beginning of what?" "Exactly?" Ethan asked, a mixture of fascination and trepidation washing over him. Eleanor turned to face him fully, her eyes, a striking blue that seemed to hold countless stories, meeting his directly. "The beginning of your true purpose, Ethan Miller. You've been living half a life until now, going through the motions, disconnected from the world around you. Taurus saw in you the potential to become something more, a bridge between worlds, a keeper of ancient knowledge that's being forgotten in this age of technology and disconnect." She gestured around them, to the park that stood as a carefully maintained island of nature within the urban landscape. Humanity has lost its connection to the natural world. Most people move through their lives never truly seeing, never truly hearing what's around them. Those of us who are chosen, we're the ones who keep the old bonds alive, who remind both worlds that we are all connected in ways most can no longer comprehend. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's world expanded in ways he could never have imagined. Under Eleanor's guidance, he began to understand and develop his newfound abilities. Each day brought new discoveries and challenges as he learned to navigate his dual existence, bus driver by day, bearer of ancient knowledge by night, and on his increasingly frequent days off. "Focus," Eleanor instructed one evening as they sat in her modest home on the outskirts of Great Falls. The living room, filled with books, plants, and curious artifacts, collected over a lifetime, had become Ethan's classroom. "Don't just hear the robin outside the window, feel what it's experiencing." Ethan closed his eyes, extending his awareness as she had taught him. He sensed the robin perched on a branch of the maple tree in Eleanor's front yard. Beyond the physical presence of the bird, he began to perceive impressions, contentment as it rested after a successful day of feeding, concern about a cat that had been prowling the neighborhood, anticipation of rejoining its mate at their nest. "It's worried about predators," Ethan said softly, "but otherwise at peace." Eleanor nodded approvingly. "Your connection grows stronger every day." But what's the point of all this? Ethan asked, opening his eyes. I mean, it's incredible to connect with animals this way, but the book, the Codex, mentioned responsibilities, protecting some kind of balance. What does that actually mean? Eleanor's crow, Merlin, fluttered from his perch to land on the back of her chair, cawing softly as if commenting on Ethan's question. The point, as you put it, is nothing less than maintaining the harmony between humanity and the natural world, Eleanor replied. In ancient times, when humans lived closer to nature, this balance was easier to sustain. People understood they were part of a greater whole, not separate from it. But as civilization advanced, that connection weakened. She rose to pour tea from a ceramic pot painted with animal figures. The Sentinels, beings like Taurus and Merlin, have always existed as guardians of this connection. They choose humans who can help bridge the gap, who can understand both worlds. But what am I supposed to actually do? Ethan pressed. Save endangered species, stop climate change. Those are global problems that need systemic solutions, not one guy who can talk to squirrels. Eleanor smiled patiently. Those are indeed critical issues, and yes, they require large-scale action. But our work is both broader and more specific. We protect knowledge that would otherwise be lost. We maintain sacred sites where the connection between worlds is strongest. We intervene when activities, often human but sometimes natural, threaten to disrupt crucial balances. She handed him a steaming cup. And you aren't alone. There are others like us throughout the world, each chosen by different sentinels, each with slightly different abilities based on their connection. Others? How many? Not as many as there once were, Eleanor said, a shadow crossing her face. Perhaps a few hundred globally, and it's time you met some of them. 3 days later, having arranged time off from his job, Ethan found himself driving Eleanor's old Subaru deep into the wilderness of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex. The sprawling public lands, encompassing over 1 million acres of pristine Montana landscape, contained some of the most remote and unspoiled territory in the lower 48 states. The council gathers only twice a year, Eleanor explained as they navigated a narrow dirt road. At the solstices, when the natural energies are strongest, the summer meeting is always held here in a place few humans ever visit. And in winter, New Mexico, she said with a small smile. We may be connected to nature, but we're not immune to cold. They parked the car at a small, unmarked trailhead and continued on foot. The June sun was warm overhead, but under the canopy of ancient pines, the air remained cool and fresh. Eleanor, despite her 70-plus years, moved with remarkable agility along the challenging terrain, Merlin occasionally flying ahead as if scouting their path. After several hours of hiking, they arrived at a clearing surrounded by towering glyphs. A small, crystal-clear lake occupied the center of the space, fed by a waterfall cascading down one of the rock faces. Around the lake's edge, several simple wooden structures had been built, blending harmoniously with the natural environment. And there were people, about 30 individuals of varying ages, from what appeared to be a teenager to elders even, older than Eleanor. Some were dressed in practical outdoor gear like Ethan and Eleanor, while others wore clothing that seemed to belong to different cultures and traditions. The North American Council, Eleanor said quietly, bearers from across the continent. As they approached, Ethan noticed something else. Each person was accompanied by an animal. Not pets, exactly, but companions that stayed close by their sides. He saw hawks, wolves, foxes, a mountain lion, and even a massive grizzly bear that lounged peacefully beside an elderly Native American man. Taurus isn't here, Ethan noted, feeling suddenly self-conscious. Sentinels come and go as needed, Eleanor explained. They don't always remain with their chosen bearers. Taurus will find you when necessary. A tall, broad-shouldered man with silver-streaked black hair approached them, a golden eagle perched on his leather-clad arm. His weathered face broke into a warm smile at the sight of Eleanor. "Old Crow," he said affectionately, using what Ethan assumed was a nickname. "We were beginning to wonder if you'd make it." "We're right on time, Michael," Eleanor replied, embracing him with her free arm. "The sun hasn't reached its zenith yet." Michael turned his attention to Ethan, his dark eyes appraising. "So this is Taurus's new choice. I sensed the awakening a few weeks ago." He extended his hand. "Michael Eaglesong, Cherokee Nation and bearer of sky knowledge." Ethan shook the offered hand, feeling calluses that spoke of a life of physical work. "Ethan Miller, bus driver and very new to all this." Michael laughed, a deep, resonant sound. "We were all new once. Welcome to the council." Over the next few hours, Ethan was introduced to bearers from across North America. Laura Chen from Vancouver, whose connection to the salmon had helped protect crucial watersheds. Joaquin Ramirez from Mexico City, whose rat sentinel gave him unprecedented access to urban ecosystems. Rosa Whitefeather, the teenager Ethan had noticed, who had been chosen by a wolf pack at just 13 and was being mentored by her grandmother, also a bearer. Each had stories that both amazed and humbled Ethan. They had used their abilities in ways both small and large, preventing environmental disasters, preserving traditional knowledge, guiding lost hikers to safety, even helping scientists understand animal behavior without invasive studies. As the sun reached its highest point, the gathering moved to the lakeshore, forming a circle around a simple stone altar. Michael, who appeared to be the leader of this particular council, raised his hands for silence. "We gather at the turning of the season," he began, his voice carrying easily across the clearing, "to share knowledge, to strengthen our connections, and to address the challenges facing our territories." What followed was unlike any meeting Ethan had ever witnessed. Council members reported on events in their regions, not just environmental concerns, but subtle shifts in the balance between natural and human worlds. They spoke of areas where the connection was weakening, where animals were changing migration patterns due to human activity, where ancient sites of power were being threatened by development. But they also shared successes, protected lands, recovered species, communities reconnecting with traditional ecological knowledge, humans making more sustainable choices. Ethan listened in fascination, gradually beginning to understand the scope of what he had become part of. This wasn't some mystical cult or secret society. It was a network of individuals uniquely positioned to monitor and maintain a delicate balance that most humans never perceived. As the formal reports concluded, Michael turned to Ethan. "We have a new bearer among us, Ethan Miller, chosen by Taurus, guardian of Earth wisdom. Will you stand and be recognized?" Feeling all eyes upon him, Ethan rose to his feet. A hushed murmur ran through the gathering. "Without Taurus present, the recognition cannot be completed," someone commented. As if summoned by the words, a loud snort came from the edge of the clearing. Ethan turned to see the massive bull emerge from the forest, its amber eyes finding him immediately. The council members moved aside respectfully as Taurus approached, stopping directly in front of Ethan. "The bull sentinel honors us with his presence," Michael said formally. "Ethan Miller, do you accept the responsibility that comes with being chosen? Do you vow to use your abilities to maintain the balance, to protect the ancient knowledge, and to serve as a bridge between worlds?" Looking into Taurus's eyes, Ethan felt a profound connection, stronger than anything he had experienced before. In that moment, he understood with perfect clarity that this was not random, not a mistake. He had been chosen because something in him, despite his ordinary life and perceived shortcomings, was exactly what was needed. "I accept," he said, surprised by the steadiness in his voice. "I vow to learn, to serve, and to protect the balance to the best of my ability." Taurus. lowered his massive head, gently touching his forehead to Ethan's chest. A wave of warmth spread through Ethan's body, and with it came impressions more vivid than any he had experienced. Ancient forests, prehistoric humans walking alongside megafauna, civilizations rising and falling, and through it all, the sentinels watching, guiding, preserving the crucial connection between all living things. Autumn painted the Montana landscape in vibrant shades of gold and crimson as Ethan settled into his new dual life. By day, he continued driving his tour bus routes, subtly enhancing his passengers' experiences with wildlife sightings that seemed almost magically timed. By night and on his days off, he trained with Eleanor and occasionally other bearers who passed through the region, developing his abilities and learning the ancient knowledge preserved in the Codex. Taurus remained an enigmatic presence, appearing unexpectedly during moments of significance, but never staying long. Ethan had learned this was typical of bull sentinels. They were solitary by nature, maintaining connections with their chosen bearers through a bond that transcended physical proximity. On a crisp October morning, Ethan woke before dawn with an inexplicable sense of urgency. Something was wrong. He could feel it like a discordant note in an otherwise harmonious composition. Dressing quickly, he stepped onto the small balcony of his apartment and extended his senses as Eleanor had taught him. The wildlife in and around Great Falls was agitated, birds calling out of season, nocturnal animals still active despite the approaching sunrise, insects swarming in unusual patterns. Something had disrupted the natural rhythms, something significant. Ethan's phone rang, startling him back to immediate awareness. It was Eleanor. "You feel it too," she said without preamble, her normally calm voice tense. "What's happening?" Ethan asked, already reaching for his keys. "A disturbance in the Sweetgrass Hills, something major. The council has been monitoring activity there for months, a mining company conducting exploratory operations near one of the old sites." Ethan knew about the Sweetgrass Hills, a series of isolated buttes rising from the plains near the Canadian border, considered sacred by several Native American tribes. What he hadn't known was that they contained what bearers called a confluence, a location where the connections between human, animal, and natural worlds were exceptionally strong. "I'll pick you up in 20 minutes, he said, already heading for the door. The drive north took over 2 hours, during which Eleanor explained the situation more fully. Zenith Mining Corporation had acquired rights to explore for rare earth minerals in the area. On paper, their operations were modest and supposedly environmentally sound. In reality, they had been gradually expanding beyond their permitted boundaries, approaching an ancient sacred site unknown to conventional archaeologists, but vital to the network of natural energies that bearers helped maintain. "Why hasn't the council stopped them already?" Ethan asked as they sped along the highway, the hills visible as distant silhouettes on the horizon. Eleanor sighed, stroking Merlin's feathers as the crow sat calmly between them, despite the car's speed. "It's complicated. We don't interfere with human activities unless absolutely necessary. We guide, suggest, sometimes create small obstacles, but direct intervention is a last resort. The mining company has been cautious, moving slowly enough that more dramatic action wasn't justified." "Until now," Ethan said, sensing there had been a significant change. "Until now," Eleanor confirmed grimly. "Last night, they brought in heavy equipment, drilling apparatus capable of penetrating deep into the earth. If they breach the underground chamber at the confluence, the damage could be irreparable." As they approached the Sweetgrass Hills, Ethan could feel the disturbance more acutely, a sense of wrongness that made his skin prickle. They parked on a service road and continued on foot, following a path that seemed unremarkable to ordinary eyes, but which Eleanor navigated with absolute certainty. The sound of machinery grew louder as they hiked up a wooded slope, Cresting a ridge, they gained a view of a shallow valley where several vehicles and a large drilling rig stood. Workers in hard hats moved purposefully around the site, which was surrounded by temporary fencing bearing Zenith Mining Corporation logos. "We're too late," Eleanor whispered, pointing to where the drill bit was already being positioned. "They're starting the main excavation." Ethan scanned the site, noting the dozen or so workers, the security guard at the entrance, the absence of any other bearers. "Where's the council? Shouldn't there be others here?" "Michael and Rosa are coming from Idaho, but they won't arrive until this evening. The regional bearer who normally monitors this area is in Canada dealing with another situation." Eleanor looked at him intently. "It's up to us, Ethan. This is your test." "My test? I'm still learning. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do here." Eleanor's blue eyes held his steadily. "Yes, you do. Trust what Taurus has shown you. Trust what you've learned. This is why you were chosen. Not because you were already prepared, but because you have exactly what's needed for moments like this." Before Ethan could respond, a familiar presence touched his mind. Turning, he saw Taurus standing at the edge of the trees, massive and regal in the morning light. The bull's amber eyes conveyed a clear message. This was indeed Ethan's trial, a moment that would define his path as a bearer. Taking a deep breath, Ethan centered himself and considered their options. Direct confrontation would likely fail. They had no legal standing to stop the operation. Subtle influence might work on individuals, but not on an entire crew working under corporate supervision. What they needed was to delay the drilling long, enough for the council to arrive with a more permanent solution. An idea began to form in Ethan's mind, unusual, perhaps even risky, but potentially effective. He closed his eyes, extending his awareness not to the workers or the machines, but to the wildlife surrounding the area. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked softly. "Calling for help," Ethan replied, his concentration focused on projecting a specific need to the animal consciousness around them. Minutes passed as Ethan maintained his silent communication. Then, gradually, responses began to come. From the forest behind them, from burrows beneath the earth, from the air above, a multitude of presences acknowledging his call. Opening his eyes, Ethan turned to Eleanor with newfound determination. "I need you to create a distraction at the main entrance. Nothing dramatic, just enough to draw the security guard's attention for a few minutes." Eleanor raised an eyebrow, but nodded. "Merlin and I can manage that." As she and the crow made their way toward the front of the mining site, Ethan moved to a position with a better view of the drilling rig. He waited, watching as Eleanor approached. The guard station, Merlin creating a commotion by diving at the guard's head, while Eleanor apologized profusely for her pet bird's behavior. With the guard distracted, Ethan focused his attention on the drill itself. He thought carefully of what he needed. Not destruction, not chaos, but a series of small, inexplicable problems that would force a temporary shutdown. The response was immediate and remarkable. From the trees surrounding the site emerged dozens of squirrels moving with coordinated purpose. They raced across the open ground, some heading for the drilling rig, others for the heavy equipment parked nearby, still others for the electrical generators powering the operation. Workers shouted in surprise as the small creatures swarmed over their equipment. Some laughed, seeing it as a bizarre but harmless incident. Their amusement turned to concern. However, as warning lights began flashing on control panels, a technician yelled something about electrical problems. Another pointed to where squirrels were removing caps from fluid reservoirs. More animals joined the effort, birds swooping down to pull at wiring, foxes darting from the underbrush to drag away tools, even a family of porcupines waddling determinedly toward the tires of the drilling truck. None of the animals harmed the humans, but their coordinated activities created a cascade of minor malfunctions that quickly escalated into major operational issues. Within 15 minutes, the site supervisor had called for a shutdown. Ethan heard him on the phone with company headquarters, explaining the unprecedented animal behavior and the multiple equipment failures. Words like inspection, delay, and at least 24 hours drifted across the site. As the workers began securing the equipment, Ethan felt a surge of pride and gratitude toward the animals who had responded to his call. One by one, he thanked them, conveying appreciation and assurance that they could return to their normal activities. The creatures departed as mysteriously as they had arrived, melting back into the surrounding wilderness until only the confused mining crew remained. Eleanor rejoined him at their observation point, a rare look of astonishment on her usually composed face. "In 50 years as a bearer," she said quietly, "I've never seen anything quite like that." "Did I overstep?" Ethan asked, suddenly concerned he might have violated some bearer protocol. "I didn't know what else to do." Eleanor shook her head. "No, you found a third path, neither direct confrontation nor passive influence, but cooperation. You didn't control those animals. You requested their help, and they gave it freely." She looked at him with new respect. "That kind of connection is rare, even among experienced bearers." "Taurus showed me the possibility," Ethan admitted. "In the visions he shared, I saw humans and animals working together as partners, not master and servant. I just applied the concept." As if summoned by his words, Taurus appeared beside them, his massive form somehow moving silently through the underbrush. The bull's eyes held approval, and Ethan felt a warm sense of accomplishment flow through their connection. By evening, other council members had arrived, bringing with them resources and strategies for a more permanent solution. Michael Eaglesong revealed connections to environmental advocacy groups who could challenge Zenith's permits. Rosa Whitefeather's grandmother, a tribal elder, initiated the process to have the area declared a protected cultural site. Another bearer, a lawyer from Seattle, began preparing documentation of environmental violations that could trigger regulatory intervention. As the group gathered around a small campfire that night, safely distant from the mining site, Ethan found himself at the center of an impromptu celebration. The delay he had created had given the council the time they needed to implement legal and procedural protections for the confluence. "You faced your first trial with creativity and compassion," Michael told him, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his weathered features. "You found a way to protect the balance without creating new harm. That is the essence of what it means to be a bearer." Later, as the gathering broke into smaller conversations, Ethan walked a short distance away, seeking a moment of quiet reflection. So much had changed in the months since that hot summer day when a bull had blocked his path. The monotonous life he had been living, disconnected, purposeless, merely going through the motions, had been transformed into something rich with meaning and wonder. He sensed Taurus before he saw him, the bull's presence a steady warmth in his mind. The massive animal emerged from the shadows, moving to stand beside Ethan as they both gazed out over the moonlit landscape of the Sweetgrass Hills. "I still don't fully understand why you chose me," Ethan said softly. "There must be people better suited for this responsibility, more knowledgeable, more connected to nature from the beginning." Through their link, he received not words, but impressions. Images of himself noticing subtle changes in the landscape. Over years of driving the same routes, his quiet appreciation for the wilderness, even when he thought himself disconnected from it, his fundamental decency and respect for all living things. Taurus had recognized potential in him that Ethan himself had never seen. The capacity to bridge worlds because he had experienced the emptiness of living in just one. In that moment, standing beside his sentinel under the vast Montana sky, Ethan felt a profound sense of belonging, not just to the select circle of bearers, but to something much larger, the intricate web of life that connected all beings across time and space. He had found his purpose, his true path. As the seasons turned, Ethan continued his journey as a bearer of Earth wisdom. He maintained his job as a bus driver, finding it provided the perfect cover for monitoring remote areas and subtly educating tourists about the natural world. His passengers often remarked on his uncanny ability to spot wildlife and his profound knowledge of ecological relationships, never suspecting the true extent of his connection to the creatures they photographed through bus windows. In time, he became a respected member of the council, known for his innovative approaches to maintaining the balance between human activity and natural processes. The cabin in the forest became his second home, its library of ancient knowledge gradually becoming as familiar to him as the roads he had driven for years. And always, Taurus remained his guide and companion, sometimes physically present, sometimes a warm awareness at the edge of his consciousness, but always connected by a bond that transcended ordinary understanding. Together, they walked the Guardian's path, preserving the ancient wisdom that connected all living things and helping to ensure that the delicate balance of the world would endure for generations to come. Fimda Historia. Dear listeners, we hope Ethan's journey from an ordinary bus driver to a bearer of ancient wisdom has touched your hearts. The story of how one unexpected encounter with a mysterious bull transformed his life reminds us that profound connections to nature exist all around us, waiting to be discovered. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories about ordinary people discovering extraordinary purposes. Find it by clicking the link to your left. If you enjoyed this tale of awakening and connection, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day, we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and wonder of life's hidden dimensions. Our next episode will take you to the misty coastlines of Oregon, where another unexpected guardian awaits its chosen human companion. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment when you felt unusually connected to an animal or to nature? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might inspire our next narrative adventure. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most meaningful paths in life begin with unexpected detours.